Hello, I'm Paul Zimmy Finn, and this is the Generation Report. Imagine for a moment that you're a kid again. Never mind the accumulation of experiences and the adoption of responsibilities you've taken on since. What is being with your friends like? What is the entire circle of kids around you like? Are they confidently self-expressive or eager to blend in with others? Are they goody two-shoes or risk takers? If you could do anything with your friends, something you would all enjoy and that you knew your parents would never find out about, what would it be? Okay, now you're an adult again, presumably. Looking back, what did you do as a kid when you were with your friends and away from adult supervision? What did you do that got you in trouble? Or should have? What have your parents told you about what they did when they were kids with their friends? Were the things you and your parents did with your respective groups of friends different? And if they were, why do you think that is? Every person is shaped by forces greater than themselves, and the same is true of people in groups. The social influences that surround people, the location and history to which they reside, and the generation to which they belong, do much more than just confer individuals with prevailing tendencies. They give otherwise very different individuals who share these markers of experience a common identification that begins in childhood and lasts a lifetime. Where do a person's prevailing tendencies come from? From many sources, but predominantly from two social influences that shape everyone: family and peer environment. The foundation of a person's identity takes form in the confines of the family before it is molded by the wider world. We all inherit certain strengths, weaknesses, proclivities, and idiosyncrasies from our lines of ancestry. As people grow up and grow older, that identity becomes a gradual accumulation of tendencies and perspectives and choices, increasingly shaped by living within one's peer environment. Peer environment creates in each person what 20th century Spanish philosopher José Ortega called a, quote, dynamic compromise between the mass and the individual, unquote. This compromise, when manifested within a group of people all close in age, establishes a set of characteristic attitudes and behaviors which together form a peer personality. The peer personality of a given group of people does evolve over time, but the essential roots of that personality in the common experiences of those people does not. Think about the way you, in growing up, related to your siblings, your friends and classmates at school, your close-in-age cousins, and the kids you rode the bus with, sat in class with, ran on the playground with, went to extracurriculars with, and played sports with. In order to navigate the ups and downs of social interaction, have friendships, and do well in school, you probably exhibited behaviors and habits that resembled, to some extent, those of the other kids around you. If you didn't, then or later in life, you almost certainly were aware of your outsider status. As you grew older, the nature of your social interactions with your close-in-age peers may have evolved, but the basic tenor of those interactions most likely did not. The peer personality you share is the reason why. Now think about how different these interactions and relationships were than the ones you had with your much older cousins, or your babysitters, or your teachers and other authority figures, or your aunts and uncles, or, especially, with your parents and your grandparents. How do you relate today to your much younger cousins, or the children you babysit, or the kids you teach, or your nieces and nephews? How do you relate to your older and younger coworkers? How do you relate to your own children and grandchildren? On some level, you have always been conscious of relating to people of older and younger ages differently than people close to you in age. And more generally, you have always been aware that people much older and much younger than you were themselves different. Because you had different social influences, you and your friends have always been different from your parents and their friends, and you always will be. The experience of moving through life, absorbing social influences, and living among one's peer environment does not happen in a vacuum. People experience their life's milestones among the background of events, trends, opportunities, and social attitudes around them. The peer personalities of people of different ages take on characterizations wholly distinct from one another, and these differences persist. The reason is historical timing. The dominant influence that affects how people absorb the events, trends, opportunities, and social attitudes around them, how they respond to them, what lessons they take from them, is age. The age at which people experience the events, trends, opportunities, and social attitudes around them relies on when they were born. The timing when people are born gives them a location in history, and each person's location in history is determined by the saeculum. The saeculum has 4 seasons, or turnings. 4 turnings of history pass over the course of a typical long human life, which itself has 4 phases. Each of the 4 seasons of the saeculum is defined by a dominant social mood, and with it, a particular kind of social environment. Consequently, there are continually 4 groups of people who comprise the dominant share of the living in a society. Each of these groups, by virtue of its unique combination of social influences and location in history, is a generation. Defined by Merriam-Webster as, quote, a group of individuals born and living contemporaneously, unquote, the generation's impact is usually discussed in ways that imply its connection with history is coincidental or even random. It is not. To the contrary, generations are tangible groups of people who shape their societies in distinct ways. Like people, generations have strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, preferences, idiosyncrasies, fears, hopes, aspirations, memories, and futures of a limited duration. Like people, even as generations continually evolve, they carry certain enduring traits with them. Generations that in childhood display a prioritization on structure and gathering in teams invariably carry a collectivist orientation with them for the rest of their lives. Generations that in childhood display a fascination with principle and outlets for self-expression invariably carry an individualist orientation with them for the rest of their lives. Generations that in childhood display a distinctive empathic sensitivity or hardened resiliency do not suddenly abandon those characteristics later either. As a generation ages, it leaves its imprint upon everything it touches, from education and music and art to business and government and family life. So what, then, determines the length of a generation? Since the social mood changes approximately every 20 years, the social influences upon a society's people change approximately every 20 years as well. Accordingly, every 20 years or so, each phase of life is occupied by people with a different set of strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, preferences, idiosyncrasies, fears, hopes, and experiences than the people who came just before. Put another way, each phase of life changes every 20 years or so because the people living through that phase of life have a distinct characterization to them. A generation, then, is approximately the length of a phase of a human life, about 20 years long, making for 4 generations that are born during the course of a saeculum. Having established that generations last approximately 20 years, and that a saeculum lasts the length of 4 turnings and of 4 generations, we can now say the following. Every generation is shaped according to the turning-related sequence of historical seasons it lives through. Since the saeculum is cyclical, it creates 4 distinct kinds of generations in a sequence that repeats every 80 years or so. Generations born approximately 80 years apart are similar in terms of their locations in history, in their peer personalities, and in the basic way they shape history. Just as the seasons in history repeat, the saeculum cycle of generations produces archetypes, recurrent models, of generations that repeat continually throughout history. Please tune in to the next episode, Generational Theory Part 4, Generational Archetypes. Thank you for listening.